So firstly, I'm Gately. He will be president of this country 2 cycles ahead, and he deserves to be. He's the next Malay. He's a libertarian. He's a capitalist, but he believes he has a social conscience. So he will be looking out carefully to ensure the trickle-down works, that the people who are less privileged or struggling or unemployed get lifted up. He does care about that, but he's a capitalist. He believes in rule of law, and he's principled and has the right values, and he's charismatic. People like being with him. He makes the effort. There's a sports team that haven't had their flights paid and are trapped in South America. He picks the phone up, says, money is there, you can fly back. He gets things done. So Gayton, president of this country in 8 years.
Guys, so the more I study South Africa's politicians and businessmen, I've come to realize that Rob Hersov is actually one of those business people in South Africa who has actually made really bold predictions in South Africa that have come true, and many have actually missed the mark just by an inch. And in this video here, he's actually explaining why and how McKenzie would likely assume the presidency of South Africa, probably in the next 2 cycles, as he argues. I think probably not maybe 2029 elections, but probably the next one. And he argues that, McKenzie, has traits like Milei of Argentina and, the president of El Salvador, who actually has really curbed crime in El Salvador, making El Salvador, which was previously known as the murder capital of the world, now is the safest country in the Western Hemisphere. And Rob Hersov actually argues and is really confident that McKenzie has these qualities and traits, and that's why he deserves to be the president of South Africa. Let's quickly listen to how he breaks down why McKenzie should be the president of South Africa and what really are the kind of credits, the achievements McKenzie has achieved in this short time in which he has been Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture in South Africa. And I'll be back for another really interesting analysis on Milei, the president of Argentina. What has he done in Argentina? Why is he really popular among the business community in South Africa, especially the likes of Rob Hersov? And what is it that actually Rob Hersov sees in McKenzie that he actually sees in a similar trait in Milei, the president of Argentina? Let's listen quickly to Rob Hersov actually argue for McKenzie's presidency in South Africa, and I'll be back for that analysis.
So what's happening is you, the consumer, becoming the editor. So when we in the UK only had the BBC, they knew what was right for us. They were the editors. They told us, this is a good program. This is what you should watch. We know what's best for you. Rupert Murdoch says that's bollocks. Let the consumer decide. And what has happened is taken quite a long time, but the consumer is the editor now. You don't have to watch BBC. You don't have to watch anything. I only watch rugby and cricket on DSTV. Only. I'm thinking of getting rid of it and finding other ways to do it. How dare they tell me I have to pay for all these other stupid channels that I never watch? They're not the editor. I am. I'm in charge. I'm the consumer. And that's where it's heading. So bundling choice, telling us what we have to watch, telling us what we need to listen to, like the celebrities tried to do, doesn't work anymore.
Well, and that brings us to the final point I wanted to talk to you about, and that's McKenzie. You've backed McKenzie at a time. I remember at that one BizNews conference where you gave your cabinet and you said, I would make McKenzie the president. And it was almost a gasp from the audience. And I looked at you and laughed and said, come on, Rob, seriously?
I know you did.
And now look
did
at
exactly
it.
that.
He's become the, well, perhaps because of his background, he's got his feet on the ground. He lacks ego because you can just go and read his books and you know where he's been. But he's done a job that has endeared him to many people, including, I think, this whole story with sport and with what's been going on with the Springboks. Now, you've got an inside track on all of that. We have touched on it, but I think there's a bit more depth that we need to look at.
So firstly, I'm Gately. He will be president of this country 2 cycles ahead, and he deserves to be. He's the next Malay. He's a libertarian. He's a capitalist, but he believes he has a social conscience. So he will be looking out carefully to ensure the trickle-down works, that the people who are less privileged or struggling or unemployed get lifted up. He does care about that, but he's a capitalist. He believes in rule of law, and he's principled and has the right values, and he's charismatic. people like being with him. He makes the effort. There's a sports team that haven't had their flights paid and are trapped in South America. He picks the phone up, says, money is there, you can fly back. He gets things done. So Gayton, president of this country in 8 years, and he deserves it. A lot of big calls of the program today. And then the other point, sorry, what was the other point? I've weaved.
On what's happened with sport. And you kind of triggered that via your point about DSTV. Because Gayton McKenzie stepped in and made sure that the Springbok matches were televised on SABC, well, free to air, basically. But when you take it one step further, the sale of the Springboks, you gave us some wonderful insights in that conversation. But there's a lot more going on behind the scenes there. And you start thinking, but hang on a minute, how did this all come to pass in the first place? That somebody's going to get 15% commission just for introducing the Springboks to a potential purchaser who's not the best purchaser anyway. So have you dug anything else up there?
So Brian Mahon, he's in the 15th. He's got a big chunk of the 15%. He's keeping very low profile.
The same
but he's
Brian Mahon.
Yeah, that's the same guy. That's the guy.
Rob,
so it's not really Eddie Jordan. Eddie's name's out there as the guy because Eddie's kind of a respectful guy that people like. So you kind of go, well, he's a good guy and maybe he deserves a big percentage. But it's actually Brian. He's got the main chunk of that. First to say it.
Okay. Before you
Brian,
go further, Brian Mahon, I was at in a past life, it feels like I was head of sponsorships at ABSA. We were the second biggest sponsorship grouping in the country. It was part of my portfolio there when I was in banking. And we had a thing called the United Bank Soccer Challenge. So I, perforce, was getting to meet people like Stix Marewa, Danny Jordan, not the guys you'd be inviting home to read the Bible with you. And you had Brian Mahon as the puppet master behind the scenes. I thought he'd gone out of the country because that United Bank Challenge was closed down, and I thought that was the end of him. But you say he's made a comeback here, and indeed, after all of those people were exposed for what they were doing with soccer, so he's now moved on to rugby.
He's the puppet master again, the same guy. And Gayton called me and said, I listened to your Biz News interview, your discussion on the Saru Springbok deal and Ackley. And he said, look, if you feel so badly about it, why don't you make a competing bid? He's right. If I was, I'm not going to, but I think Warren Wheatley and Altfest will, and I know two other groups that are gearing up to make a competing bid, which is good. The more money Saru gets, the better, surely, from the right partner. And then Ackley, I sent my words to Ackley, and he messaged me back and said, Rob, I'm so sorry, don't like the deal. And I said, well, I think you've done an unbelievable job. Respect to you. You've rolled over Mark Alexander and Saru. I mean, you've got the deal of the century. Well done you. That's your job. So he said, okay, noted, and moved on. But I think Gayton's been in London, has spoken to Ackley, and he's probably trying to improve the deal, just saying that it doesn't look right. You've got to do a better deal here. But Gayton's right. If somebody else can do a better deal, they need to come out of the woodwork and offer a better deal. And Gayton also said he's done deals where it's been 20% commission. And I suppose that's also true. If Saru is so stupid to give 15% for an introduction, it just says it all about Mark Alexander and his team. They're amateurs.
And it's not surprising. They come from the sporting unions. It doesn't mean that they are necessarily people who've been dealing in this area before. But if I understand you correctly, then Ackley are going to come back with a better offer, and anybody else who wants to put something on the table, the Minister of Sport is saying, bring it. Let's get the best possible deal for this national asset.
Correct. Look, they should have up front done a proper process where they invited bids and chose the two best bidders to fight against each other. But, because they have no idea what they're doing, and Brian kind of, he's a persuasive guy. Who knows where that money's going? You always have a little worry in the back of your head that maybe not all of it's going to Brian and Eddie. Maybe the other participants. Let someone else find that
Lifestyle
out.
audits, not just for the politicians. Helen Ziller, Go Woke, Go Broke, the book that she wrote. Her party is being accused of maybe getting a little close to the ANC way of doing things. Helen hasn't lost her compass, has she?
No, she hasn't. She's just trying to get the GNU working and heading in the right direction. The DA are much more pro-West, pro-American than they'll ever be, Russia and China. But, they're trying to going back, instead of being pro-BRICS, pro-Russia, China, they're trying to move it to being not aligned, which is probably a better position to be in. And Helen is a rock star. She's the best. Go work, go broke. She's absolutely right. She is a lioness. I mean, I give her 100% credit.
But is she thinking differently now about Gate and McKenzie? Because you're now talking about two people in politics that you admire greatly.
I wish I knew, because the DA have a block about him and they won't tell me why. I keep asking them, give me a shred of proof of why you think Gayton's a bad guy, in the arms of the ANC, a gangster, criminal, whatever you want to say. Just give me a shred of proof. Nothing forthcoming, ever. I think it's just loony bins. They feel threatened in the Western Cape. And, he's proving to be exactly what I said he'd be, an extraordinary politician.
Brilliant. So we'll just quickly go into, the report. I think I saw here a really interesting report on 1 year of Javier Milei's performance in growing the economy of Argentina after he's actually spent 1 year in the presidency. And this is actually from a Frederick Norman Foundation. It's a research, really interesting. I really enjoyed reading this research a lot. It says that, Javier Milei is a self-confessed anarcho-capitalist, all right? In other words, I think this is an anarchist, but at the same time a capitalist, one who doesn't believe in war, but at the same time, he's also a believer in, capitalist ideals, libertarian ideals and all that. And this is actually one of the reasons why McKenzie argues that this is one of his heroes. Rob Hersov argues that Javier Milei, the current president of Argentina, is actually one of his heroes because he understands how the economics of society and a country runs and works, and how South Africa's economy compared to Argentina's economy were alike. But now Javier Milei has put certain things in place that has turned the economy of Argentina around. So let's quickly understand what he did and what likely South Africa's economy might need to undergo to be able to achieve the success that Javier Milei is actually achieving in Argentina. So it says that in November of 2023, Javier Milei was elected president of Argentina with a clear majority of 56% and took office in December. It said that Javier Milei inherited a difficult legacy from the previous Peronist government with a hyperinflation of 211% in 2023. Argentina was really in a mess. 211% inflation, and it had a recession of 1.6% and a high poverty rate of 45%. All right. So it says that Milei took over a disastrous economic and financial policy from the previous Peronist government under the leadership of Alberto Fernandez. And in 2023, Argentina had the highest inflation rate in the world, 211%, as I've mentioned. It says that in election surveys, the population cited hyperinflation as the biggest concern, all right, of Argentina at the time. So Argentina was not just only dealing with the inflation, but they were dealing with the hyperinflation. I don't know if South Africa is dealing with inflation yet. I think probably what South Africa might be dealing with is a recession, so to speak, but the high unemployment rate and, massive crime rates. But anyway, it says that during the election campaigns, Milei promised to make the fight against inflation his top priority, all right? It says that immediately after taking office, Javier Milei presented an ambitious economic program with a comprehensive omnibus law with 600 measures and an emergency decree. So this speaks of a person who was really ready. He had all the policies in place, all the policies in time. And if McKenzie would be, like Rob Hersov argues, one of those kinds of presidents that actually would be the one to move South Africa out of the throes of the darkness it finds itself. McKenzie would have had his policies in place already ready as Javier Milei did. So Javier Milei had 600 measures in place and an emergency decree of 300 measures, all right? It says, anyway, nonetheless, Javier Milei and his movement, La Liberté Avanza, does not have a majority in either of the chambers. And actually, I think this is a House of Senate and probably House of Assembly, probably in this arrangement. And this would likely be a similar campaign, except maybe McKenzie wins much more of the electorate, a major share of the electorate. We know that McKenzie, the Patriotic Alliance, passed with, I think, was it about 6% of the electorate during the last elections, while the EFF fell from 12% to or 11% to 10%, and MK Party rose all the way to about really, really high. But anyway, it says that Milei's party doesn't have a majority in any of the chambers. And so they are dependent on the support of the middle class and the moderate MPs of the Peronist party. All right. It says, after a first attempt in April, Javier Milei succeeded in getting the omnibus law through Congress in July. And it was actually, the emergency decree as well was also another instrument he actually passed that was used by the previous Argentine presidents to govern, but it's still in force. And, having been rejected by the Senate, but not by the Chamber of Deputies, all right? So in any way, it speaks about how, the bullish attitude of Javier Milei to pass through some of his policies, despite the really thick resistance from the parliament. It says Javier Milei has succeeded in significantly reducing the inflation rate of Argentina in his first year in office by implementing tough austerity measures. It says on a monthly basis, inflation now stands at 2.7%. Wow. So that was an inflation rate when he came to office was at 211%. Now, it speaks about that as at October 2024, inflation now stands at 2.7%. This speaks of someone who probably really knows what he's doing. Although the austerity measures must have beat really hard, because to really fight inflation from 211% to 2.7%, it's actually would demand a commitment even by the citizens themselves. And it's surprising that the country didn't even blow up in a riot. It's really striking. So he said food prices in particular have recently risen less sharply, because that's what inflation does. Inflation rises prices of goods, especially in food. And when people are hungry, when there's no food, what can happen? People jump into the streets to riot. But it says that in Argentina now, food prices have risen less sharply, and rent and energy prices have continued to rise at an above average rate. And on an annual basis, however, the inflation rate is currently around it says that the inflation rate is likely to fall further in the coming months. All right. And then also it says that in addition to combating inflation, Javier Milei has dedicated himself to budget consolidation as the second prominent goal in his economic and financial policy. So he wants to consolidate the budget in line with his self-declared worldview as a libertarian anarcho-capitalist. Milei sees the state as a fundamental evil and only recognizes the safeguarding of public order and the legal system as the legitimate state's task. In other words, he doesn't believe that the state should be carrying out government business. He doesn't believe that the state industries, and this is a major problem in South Africa, not like a problem per se, just a characteristic of South African governance, in that the state has a really major stake in many industries. And that's why there are a lot of public officers and, like the likes of Rob Hersov, he actually argues that South Africa has too many ministries, that you don't need a Ministry of Sports, Arts and Culture. You don't even need a Ministry of Women. You don't need many ministries will have to cut down in order to implement this kind of libertarian sort of like way of governance in South Africa. But it says that Javier Milei doesn't believe that the state should actually be running, some of these things. He says that the state's only duty should be safeguarding of public order, and then also safeguarding of the legal system as these are legitimate state tasks. So as soon as Javier Milei took office, he began to reduce state spending by abolishing or merging industries and subordinate authorities, all right? And this resulted in a lot of budget savings. In Argentina, there's a policy called cold progression. And this is actually, it's kind of like a cold progression of falling real incomes, which has had a long tradition and is actually called a la liquadora. If in English, I think it is liquidation, so to speak. But anyway, in the language there, I think this is the language spoken there, it speaks la liquidora means a mixer. So in addition, it says that Javier Milei is actually in line with his libertarian economic philosophy. He has put an almost complete stop to public infrastructure projects, which will have to be financed privately in future, and coined the phrase no hay plata, which is there's no money. So in other words, any public infrastructure that will be funded by government, I think Javier Milei doesn't want the government to be funding all that, but now private infrastructure would have to be done by private individuals. And so this is actually an open door for private investors to come into South Africa and really carry on infrastructural projects. So this is one way economists, some really libertarian economists, see the way to grow the society, that rather than the government taking charge of building infrastructures, as we see Dean Macpherson being a minister of public works, Javier Milei argues that the minister of public works won't be necessary, because now the public works, probably there will be a public works minister, but it wouldn't be one that would build the infrastructural development, so to speak, from the government's purse, but it would actually have to be open to individuals and private capital to be able to carry out massive infrastructural projects. All right. So it says that Milei achieved further reductions in the national budget, through the constitutionally controversial deferral of payments from the central government to the provinces, and threatened those governors, in particular with financial consequences, who did not support his political cause. It said that Milei also sort of like carried on with the gradual reduction of social benefits. So in South Africa's language today, this would be SASSA, all right? It said Milei carried out a gradual reduction of social benefits and subsidies, particularly for food, energy, and public transport, resulting in severe cuts for the population. So that's why I argue that the Argentines, they should be proud of themselves that they didn't fall out to the streets to carry out major riots, because to cut down the public subsidy of transportation and subsidies in food, energy, and public transport, it would have actually shaken a lot of the people, to which I think there was actually also a large unemployment rate. So to take out these subsidies would have meant disaster. So I don't really know how this whole thing will play out in the event of getting McKenzie presidency, and cutting off of probably many SASSA, maybe grants, I don't know, but there'll be cut off of subsidies and all that, in terms of trying to maintain an austerity situation in South Africa, and how that would really play out among South Africans. It's really difficult to ascertain at the moment. But anyway, it says that since January, the new government has been able to achieve a budget surplus every month for the first time since 2008. And although a slight deficit was recorded in July, which the government explained was seasonally high expenditure, the budgetary discipline that has been introduced is also an important prerequisite for further debt restructuring negotiations with the IMF, of which Argentina is the largest debtor. So Argentina is the largest debtor to the IMF, all right? And so these disciplinary measures were really necessary in order to secure more loans from the IMF, but also at the same time pay out. So the country was really in a mess. So it really needed a strong hand, full of discipline, economic and financial discipline, to help the nation rise to the top. It says that the loan of $44 billion and the necessary gradual reform measures were negotiated in 2018 under the then president Mauricio Macri. So at the end of the day, it speaks of the financial discipline that Javier Milei has brought into Argentina to help the country grow. In terms of agriculture and energy sector, I think this is really important to also try to understand how Argentina is winning and how this can be reread in South Africa's situation. It says Argentina is not only rich in agricultural products, but also has attractive conditions for investment in the energy and raw material sector. It says the country has considerable gas and oxygen reserves, and favorable climate conditions for renewable energies, as well as valuable raw materials, particularly lithium, which is important for battery production, and is one of the 3 countries with the largest reserves after Chile and Australia. But also copper. It also has copper. So it's really difficult how a country with this kind of really important, resources would be broke to the point of having a 211% inflation. It speaks to poor management at the level of the presidency, so to speak, or economy. But anyway, it says that previous investments in northern Argentina have mainly come from China and are controversial, not least because of their impact on the environment, but also local production. Then it says, however, due to geopolitical and economic risks, Western countries are now striving for greater independence from authoritarian countries like Russia and China, and in the energy and raw material sector, and they're working hard to diversify their procurement market. So as a pro-Western democratic country, Argentina offers considerable potential in that area where Western countries are trying to distance themselves from Russia and China, all right? And this is where Western investments will likely come in and really bolster Argentina's economy under the leadership of Javier Milei. It says that the fact that this offer has not yet met with greater demand from the West has to do in particular with the adverse investment conditions in the country presently. And this is precisely where Milei came in by launching the investment promotion package, which he called RIGI. It was part of the omnibus law which he passed, and it includes a 30-year tax concession and foreign trade facilitation for larger investments, which is over $200 million in selected sectors such as energy, raw materials, infrastructure, and technology. And so it argues that since the law came into force in July, the first foreign companies, have actually already announced investments, following the growing interest of foreign companies in Argentina since Milei took office. And the country risk for Argentina on the international markets has also decreased significantly compared to the previous Peronist government, although it is still above the initial level of the Mauricio Macri's presidency between 2015 and 2019. So, all in all, anyway, what this whole thing speaks about, especially the revamping of Argentina's economy, is the fact that Javier Milei, being a libertarian, spoke in a way that the markets understand, all right? And it appears that, especially this is what Rob Hersov has been speaking about, that what a country needs, basically, to grow is simply sort of like opening up for investments, all right? Many would argue in the socialist camp anyway that this would be leaning towards, what has been called in South Africa as the white monopoly capitalists and all that. But at the end of the day, it appears that the citizens within a nation, to be able to help unemployment grow, to reduce unemployment and all that, there has to be a certain level of investment coming in from, foreign investments that would help boost the employability or probably open new spaces for employment for the people to work. And by increasing the income generation within the economy, that the money to spend, with money in circulation going around the economy, then the economy slowly starts to pick up and then helps to beat inflation. And then people are able to afford kind of like a much more sensible living in a way. And so this whole thing speaks to the weakness of the power that the state has in trying to control economy. There has to be a sort of like a balance. The state has its own role, but also private capital has its own role. And the meeting points together have to have a certain balance to be able to allow the country kick off, so to speak, and take off like what Rob Hersov usually argues, like take off like a rocket. And so he believes that McKenzie is this person because the South Africa case is very peculiar, that foreign investors are likely encouraged to invest in South Africa, especially now we saw that with the GNU, the rand picked up. Foreign investors have now a little bit more confidence, in the GNU, and in likely leadership of a libertarian like McKenzie, there will be much more confidence, but also at the same time, foreign investors have always been scared with the crime rate in South Africa and all that. But with a guy like McKenzie, who understands how these crime probably networks work, and he has actually argued that he's going to adopt the policies of the president of El Salvador, Bukele, and all that. So this would boost a lot of confidence for foreign investment and open the doors for much more foreign investors to come in, boosting the markets and in a way, hopefully opening up the doors for more employment of the large majority which is unemployed to the tune of 33.3%, and probably hopefully see a much more boisterous South African economy going forward. And this is why Rob Hersov argues that the right man to do this job is McKenzie, and probably not the comrades. Maybe there's some libertarians in the ANC, but the ANC has actually been presented itself as a much more left-wing, that kind of conservative, in terms of economics anyway, conservative economics within the throes of socialism and all that, having much more socialist policies and all that, which has actually led South Africa to where it is for the last 30 years. So these are kind of like the tricky ways in which one doesn't really know what could happen in the event of a McKenzie presidency. But the idea of having the economy open up to a much more libertarian worldview that opens up the doors of South Africa to the entrepreneurship that is actually already inherent in South Africa. South Africa has a really healthy entrepreneurial space, although many businesses are leaving South Africa. But at the end of the day, Rob Hersov argues that a libertarian leader and a libertarian worldview would boost economic development and economic progress in South Africa, and then lead to a much more boisterous economy. But anyway, I don't know. What do you guys think? I'll be stopping here for this video. What do you think about Jammeh Milley, Rob Hersov's speech here, and also the possibility of McKenzie becoming president in South Africa? Share your thoughts in the comments.